The Queen Victoria Market is one of the most popular attractions in Melbourne. Although it is now the largest outdoor market in the Southern Hemisphere, Melbourne's inner city used to have many more food, flea and other marketplaces for people to buy, sell and trade. In today's video, we're going to look at two of these that have since been lost to time, the Eastern and the Western markets. While neither exist today, their legacy lives on in many different ways. Before we start, I just wanted to mention that this topic was suggested by a viewer, so thank you very much to Nigel for letting me know in a video comment. So if you have an idea, please let me know either in the comment section below or via my website linked in the description. Suggestions from you are always very welcome. And now back to today's video. The first one that we're going to look at is the Eastern market. It started operating in 1847 as a place for people to buy and sell used goods. At the time, this was called a general market. It was on the block bounded by Burke, Little Collins and Exhibition Streets. Note that at the time, Exhibition Street was under its original name of Stevenson Street, but maybe that's a topic for another day. This site was reserved by surveyor Robert Hoddle in his 1837 grid plan for central Melbourne, which today we often call the Hoddle Grid. And this was one of three market sites allocated in the central city. The Eastern market quickly became very busy as the population of Melbourne rapidly expanded. It also soon began selling fruit, vegetables and poultry on Wednesday and Saturday mornings, as well as second-hand goods. This was actually due to a fire at the Western market in 1853 that displaced these stallholders selling food. Because of this, wholesale produce and meat eventually became the Eastern market's main business rather than the Western market, which was originally meant to be the main fruit and vegetable market in Melbourne, and which we'll talk about later in this video. On top of this, the Eastern market also began to sell hay after 10 AM. This actually caused a lot of fights and disputes because vendors had to share stalls, and they didn't necessarily get on very well. Sometimes stallholders would be late packing up from the morning or take up available storage space. This issue was eventually solved in 1874, when a new site was created just for hay and corn sellers. This was on the corner of what is now Royal Parade and Flemington Road, where we today call this intersection the Haymarket Roundabout for this very reason. This period in the mid-19th century was also the heyday of the Eastern market. It was the centre of activity for the east end of the city, maybe partially because it was close to the notorious Little Lonsdale Street with its brothels and gambling dens. At its peak, there were 224 stalls here. Market gardeners from all over Melbourne would come here to sell their animals and produce, coming from Keilor to Dandenong. This hive of activity made the Eastern market a de facto public square in a city which famously had very little in the way of large gathering places. Public meetings, lectures and political rallies were regularly held here on topics ranging from voters' rights to government taxation. Known as Paddy's Market at the time, Saturday nights in particular were a hive of activity. And not just for the sale of food, clothes and homewares, but also a sort of carnival with entertainment of all kinds, including sideshows and Punch and Judy puppets. On the back of this popularity, new double-storey buildings opened in December 1879. It was a lovely looking brick building that kind of reminds me of Adelaide's Fruit and Produce Exchange buildings, which you can see here. Unfortunately, this was also to be the first nail in the market's coffin. While the new brick buildings were being built, the produce stallholders from the Eastern market temporarily relocated to the new Queen Victoria market, which had just opened in 1878. But once this was finished, many of the market gardeners refused to move back. This was apparently because they didn't like the new design, which didn't allow them to bring their drays and carts directly into the stall areas, forcing them to load and unload everything on the street and then carry them through. However, this may not have been the real reason. There were many rumours at the time of some kind of backroom deal or skullduggery to favour the Queen Victoria market over the older Eastern and Western markets, possibly to do with property values or the influence of the owners of the new market over the city council. Nothing appears to have ever been confirmed though. Regardless, this exodus left a lot of vacant stalls behind. Despite some attempts to lure customers and stallholders back, the Eastern market never recovered and fell further into disuse. This wasn't helped by a string of negative publicity and incidents in the following decade. The 1890s sealed the fate of the Eastern Market, with multiple fires, shootings, and even a murder not exactly encouraging people to visit. Perhaps the most notorious incident, though, was what became known as the Eastern Market Tragedy. In the late afternoon of the 10th of April 1899, an astrologer known as Professor Emery Medor was sitting in his small stall. He and his shop had been subjected to a series of pranks, practical jokes, and vandalism that had tormented him over many years, and he became convinced that there was a conspiracy among other stallholders to drive him away. On this particular day, he had had enough. Someone had hung a bunch of radishes over his door, apparently in reference to one of his nicknames. Having recently acquired a revolver, he left his stall and headed to the door of his neighbour on Little Collins Street, which was occupied by a palm reader, Annie Stevens, who traded under the name Zinga Lee. He accused her of orchestrating these pranks, then immediately drew out his revolver and shot at her chest. He missed his mark and only grazed her arm, but then grabbed her and beat her ear so severely that it nearly came off. As people rushed to see the commotion, he fled quickly back into his shop. Annie Stevens' husband, Frank Stevens, who was also a well-known performer going under the name Frank Cartwright, rushed from where he was working nearby. Seeking revenge for the attack on his wife, he rushed into Medor's stall, but was then immediately shot and brutally stabbed repeatedly until he was almost decapitated. Another nearby shopkeeper, a picture frame maker named Barnett Friedman, attempted to help as well, but was also stabbed by Medor in his eye. It was then that the first policeman arrived on the scene, who Medor also attempted to shoot, but shortly afterwards a second constable arrived and together they succeeded in disarming and overpowering him. Medor was quickly arrested, while Annie Stevens was treated at the Melbourne hospital for her ear wound and Barnett Friedman at the Eye and Ear Hospital, both of whom were released after treatment. Medor was later put on trial for the murder of Frank Stevens and found guilty, with a further trial taking place at the criminal court. Its jury found that he was not guilty on the grounds of temporary insanity in July, but the judge sentenced him to be kept in custody. He was later transferred to Bendigo Jail, where he was released 10 years later in May 1909, after he was judged by doctors to have sufficiently recovered his mental health. This widely publicised incident did absolutely nothing to help the poor market's waning public image. It continued to struggle on as a centre for astrologers, fortune tellers, and other pseudoscientific entertainment until the 1960s, when its luck finally ran out. It was then that Melbourne City Council entered into a 99-year lease with Pan American World Airways, commonly known as Pan Am, to build what would become one of the most famous landmarks of Melbourne's eastern CBD, the Southern Cross Hotel. It was opened in 1962 by the Prime Minister Robert Menzies, and ended up hosting a range of celebrities and VIPs, including Judy Garland, Rock Hudson, and most famously, the Beatles. This of course replaced the Eastern Market buildings, which were demolished by Whelan the Wrecker. It's worth mentioning here some of the other proposals for the site. Ever since the market's fall into disrepute at the turn of the 20th century, there were many other ideas and even approved plans to redevelop the Eastern Market. These included as the headquarters for the newly established Australian Broadcasting Commission, the ABC, in 1934, as an interstate bus terminal proposed by the Transport Board in 1936, and as a huge multi-storey parking garage with offices and shops at ground level in 1938. There were many other projects proposed right up until the 1950s, too many to list here, but the one that won out in the end was, as we just mentioned, the Southern Cross Hotel, following a huge lobbying and marketing campaign from developer groups. Today, the original foundation stone is still present just at the bottom of the steps leading up to the Southern Cross Lane from Burke Street. The clock from the original brick buildings of 1879 is still held by Melbourne City Council, and the original gates to the market were relocated and today still stand at the entrance to the Altona Memorial Park in Altona North. And that's the story of the Eastern Market. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this video, please consider liking it and subscribe to my channel so that you can stay up to date on future content. Now let's move on to the Western Market, which had a longer period of existence and certainly enjoyed a better overall reputation than its eastern cousin, although this wasn't always the case. Built in December 1841, it was the growing city's very first officially designated fresh fruit and vegetable market. This was no accident, as Robert Hoddle had specifically reserved this site back in 1837 along with the Eastern Market that we discussed before. It's bounded by Collins, William, Flinders and Market Streets, the last of which was created specifically for the market, for better access on its eastern side. Today, Market Street remains the only significant street that doesn't follow the otherwise rigid Hoddle grid. It had an ideal location right near the bank of the Yarra River, and its extensive docking and warehouse facilities. What is today the Melbourne Aquarium and Enterprise Park was a turning basin and dock for smaller ships coming up the Yarra River, which was very handy for a market like this one. The original market was pretty basic. It was a loose collection of stalls, carts and wagons scattered around an open field with some gates and a fence. Unfortunately, the Western Market quickly gained a poor reputation for being run down and for harbouring unsavoury characters. This prompted the Melbourne City Council to construct new brick buildings connected to a central arcade in 1847. This was soon followed by a two-storey building in 1856, as well as further additions in 1870. Despite these improvements, the Western Market lost trade to the Eastern Market at the other end of the city, as we talked about earlier, as well as the Queen Victoria Market, which had opened in 1878. It then found a new place as Melbourne's wholesale fruit and vegetable market and struggled on for a few decades more. But by 1934, its buildings were more or less abandoned, and it was leased as a car park in keeping with the beginning of car-centric urban planning of the period. It had a capacity for about 200 cars, with the charge being 1 shilling per day, or about $6 in today's money, counting for inflation. This car park was one of a series of ongoing proposals to demolish the buildings and replace them with large multi-storey car parks, including in 1925, 1931 and 1947. Although no longer used as a market, the buildings did continue to be used sporadically, including as a hostel for Royal Australian Air Force personnel during the Second World War. Finally, in 1960, a 28-storey building was approved to be built and the Western Market buildings demolished the next year in 1961. This building, known as the Suncorp building, was in turn demolished and replaced with the present-day building here called Collins Arch, otherwise known as the Jeans building. Both the Eastern and Western Markets were replaced by the ever-expanding and popular Queen Victoria Market, which of course survives and thrives to this day. There are still signs on the ground today to remind us of these early places of trade, with Market Street being probably the most prominent remnant. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this and would like to see more, please subscribe to my channel so that you can stay up to date on future videos. And if you're interested in bonus content like early access, consider signing up to be a supporter at members.philipmallis.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.